Reimagining Transit and Housing, a call for zoning reform in California. On July 9, 2025, a significant conversation emerged regarding the intersection of public transit investment and housing availability in California, highlighting the urgent need for zoning reforms around transit stations. Key figures in this dialogue, including Max Dubler and advocates from California YIMBY in My Backyard, emphasized that billions of dollars of public funds directed towards building and maintaining transit systems must be effectively complemented by legislative changes that allow for affordable housing development near these transit hubs. The disparity between investment and accessibility. The core of the discussion revolves around a pressing issue. While California is investing heavily in public transportation infrastructure, the existing zoning laws often hinder the development of affordable housing in the vicinity of these transit stations. This situation creates a disconnect that limits access to public transit for many residents, particularly those from lower-income backgrounds who cannot afford the high costs of living near transit options. As Dubler succinctly stated, if we're going to spend billions of dollars on public money building and maintaining these transit systems, we should change the zoning around the stations so that people can live near transit without having to spend $2 million on a single-family house. The current zoning landscape. Current zoning regulations in many Californian cities restrict the types and densities of housing that can be built near transit stations. These restrictions frequently favor single-family homes, which often come with hefty price tags, effectively shutting out a significant portion of the population from living close to reliable public transit. The argument made by various stakeholders is that this limitation not only undermines the goals of public transit systems but also exacerbates the housing crisis that California is currently facing. Advocates for change. Prominent voices in this movement include lawmakers like Representatives Friedman and Scott Peters, who advocate for policy changes that would permit increased housing density around transit stations. They argue that the current zoning practices are antiquated and fail to meet the needs of modern urban living. We can no longer invest billions in public transportation while artificially constraining who gets to live close enough to use it, they stated. Reinforcing the need for a paradigm shift in housing policy. The call for common sense solutions. The argument presented by advocates is not solely based on economic rationale, it is framed as a matter of common sense. If the state is going to invest heavily in transit infrastructure, it makes sense to also foster the development of housing that allows more people to benefit from that infrastructure. By legalizing a broader range of housing options near transit stations, California could not only alleviate housing shortages but also promote increased transit ridership, which in turn would lead to reduced traffic congestion and a more sustainable urban environment. Potential outcomes of zoning reform. The potential benefits of reforming zoning laws around transit stations are multifaceted. By enabling the construction of affordable housing, California could 1. Increase accessibility. More residents would have the opportunity to live near transit, improving their access to jobs, education, and essential services. 2. Encourage transit use. With more people living near transit stations, ridership is likely to increase, leading to a more efficient use of the public transit systems and potentially reducing the need for car travel. 3. Support sustainable development. Integrating housing with transit can lead to more walkable communities, reducing reliance on automobiles and contributing to lower greenhouse gas emissions. 4. Promote equity. Zoning reforms would help address the inequities in housing access and ensure that lower-income residents are not excluded from benefiting from public transit investments. Addressing concerns. While the push for zoning reform is gaining momentum, it is important to acknowledge and address concerns from various stakeholders. Opponents of increased density often cite worries about overdevelopment, traffic congestion, and changes to neighborhood character. It will be crucial for advocates to engage in constructive dialogue with these communities to find solutions that balance development with the preservation of neighborhood identity. Conclusion. The ongoing conversation around public transit investment and housing availability in California underscores a critical need for comprehensive policy reform. As the state continues to allocate billions towards transit infrastructure, it must also prioritize changes to zoning laws that enable the development of affordable housing near these vital transit hubs. This multifaceted approach not only promises to enhance urban living conditions but also ensures that the substantial public investment in transit systems translates into real benefits for all Californians. Only through cohesive strategies that link housing development with public transit initiatives can California achieve a sustainable and equitable urban future. The conversation surrounding public transit investment and zoning laws reveals several counterintuitive insights regarding urban planning and housing policy in California. 1. Investment versus affordability. At first glance, one might assume that investing billions in public transit should naturally lead to increased housing options nearby. However, the reality is that current zoning laws often inhibit this, leading to a paradox where substantial public expenditure does not translate into accessible housing. This disconnect implies that public investment does not automatically equate to public benefit, particularly for lower-income residents. 2. Wealth concentration. The argument suggests that existing zoning practices tend to favor wealthier individuals, effectively concentrating resources and opportunities among those who can afford high-priced single-family homes. This is counterintuitive because public investment in transit is intended to benefit the public at large, yet the regulatory environment restricts access to that benefit, reinforcing socioeconomic divides. 3. Sustainability versus current practices. Advocates argue that failing to change zoning laws not only undermines the effectiveness of transit investments but also contradicts goals of sustainability and reduced traffic congestion. The intuitive expectation would be that increased public transit leads to reduced car dependency. However, without accompanying housing reforms, transit systems might remain underutilized, perpetuating reliance on personal vehicles. For policy incentives, the current approach to zoning might imply that local governments are prioritizing the interests of existing homeowners over broader community needs. This is counterintuitive since public policy should ideally reflect the collective interests of the community rather than protect the status quo, which often favors those already in a position of privilege. 5. Transit ridership. There's a common belief that improving public transit infrastructure alone will lead to increased ridership. However, the argument put forth suggests that without affordable housing options nearby, potential users may be priced out of living in proximity to transit stations, undermining the intended benefits of the transit expansion. 6. Long-term economic impacts. While one might expect that public investment in transit will lead to immediate economic benefits for the area, the lack of affordable housing can stifle local economic growth and diversity in the long run. This is counterintuitive because the economic rationale for investing in transit is predicated on increased accessibility and mobility, which is compromised if the surrounding housing market remains out of reach for many. 7. Public sentiment versus political action. There is often a disconnect between public support for affordable housing initiatives and the political will to enact meaningful zoning reforms. This gap is counterintuitive because widespread recognition of the need for affordable housing exists, yet political structures often resist change due to the influence of established homeowners and real estate interests. 8. Perception of density. Many people have an aversion to higher density developments, associating them with overcrowding and loss of neighborhood character. However, the argument posits that increasing density around transit hubs is essential for creating vibrant, sustainable communities. This challenges the intuition that lower density equates to better living conditions while suggesting that strategic density can enhance urban life. These counterintuitive elements reveal the complexity of integrating public transit investments with housing policy and highlight the need for systemic changes that prioritize equity and accessibility in urban environments. The conversation surrounding public transit investment and the need for affordable housing near transit stations is deeply significant, yet often overlooked in discussions about urban planning and social equity. The arguments presented by advocates like Max Dubler and organizations such as California YIMBY highlight crucial points that, if ignored, can lead to ineffective use of public resources and exacerbate existing social inequities. 1. Public investment versus housing availability. The significance of the relationship between public transit investment and housing availability cannot be overstated. The billions of dollars allocated to build and maintain transit systems create a compelling case for re-evaluating zoning laws. Currently, these laws often create barriers to building affordable housing near transit stations, thereby limiting access for lower-income residents. This disconnect is significant as it undermines the purpose of public transit, providing equitable access to transportation for all citizens. When public money is poured into transit systems, the assumption should be that it will enhance the lives of a diverse population, not just those who can afford high-priced homes. Advocating for zoning reforms to allow for more diverse housing options near transit hubs is therefore not merely a logistical necessity but a moral obligation to foster inclusive communities. 2. Current limitations. Many people may overlook the restrictive nature of existing zoning laws and their impact on urban development. Zoning regulations often prioritize single-family homes and low-density developments, which can keep housing prices inflated and out of reach for many families. This exclusionary practice perpetuates inequality as it often favors wealthier individuals while sidelining low- and middle-income families who could benefit from living close to public transit. The implications are significant. As urban populations grow, the demand for housing near transit will only increase. Failing to adapt zoning laws to meet this demand could lead to more significant issues, including increased traffic congestion, longer commute times, and a deterioration of quality of life for urban residents. 3. Call to action. The urgent calls to action from lawmakers like Representatives Friedman and Scott Peters emphasize that the current system is broken and needs reform. The framing of this issue as a common-sense solution is significant because it positions the need for change as not just a policy issue but a logical one. Many individuals may not realize that enabling more housing options near transit stations could lead to a domino effect of positive outcomes: higher transit ridership, reduced carbon emissions, and an overall improvement in urban sustainability. The advocacy for policy changes indicates that a coalition of voices is coming together to push for reforms. This unity is significant as it demonstrates a growing public awareness and demand for change in how cities approach housing in transit. 4. Potential outcomes. Many people may overlook the broader implications of legalizing more housing options near transit stations. The expected outcomes of such changes extend beyond merely increasing the supply of affordable housing. Advocates argue that with increased housing availability, transit ridership would likely rise, leading to more efficient use of transit systems and less reliance on personal vehicles. This shift can contribute to reduced traffic congestion and lower greenhouse gas emissions, aligning with broader environmental goals. Moreover, creating mixed-income neighborhoods around transit hubs can foster social equity and community resilience. By ensuring that people from diverse economic backgrounds can live near transit, cities can create vibrant, inclusive communities that thrive on diversity. This outcome is significant when considering the long-term sustainability of urban environments. 5. Differences between sources. While various sources advocate for zoning changes, they may approach the issue from different angles, some highlighting financial implications while others focus on moral imperatives. This diversity in perspective is significant because it reflects the multifaceted nature of the issue. Understanding that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution allows for a more comprehensive approach to policymaking. For example, financial arguments may resonate with policymakers concerned about budgetary constraints, while moral arguments might connect more with community activists advocating for social justice. Recognizing these different narratives can help build a broader coalition for change. 6. Ongoing conversation. The ongoing nature of this conversation signals a critical moment in urban policy discussions. with significant developments and statements emerging as recently as July 2025. It is clear that the dialogue around housing and transit is evolving. This dynamic nature is significant because it suggests that the issue is gaining traction and that public sentiment may be shifting toward greater support for reform. In summary, the need to change zoning laws to facilitate affordable housing near transit stations is rooted in a profound understanding of urban equity, sustainability, and the effective use of public funds. The arguments made by advocates like Max Dubler and organizations such as California YIMBY bring to light the often overlooked connections between transit investment and housing availability, emphasizing that without coordinated efforts to reform zoning, the full benefits of public transit investments may never be realized. Ignoring this critical relationship could lead to missed opportunities for creating equitable, sustainable urban spaces where all residents can thrive. In-depth analysis of key points regarding public transit and housing zoning. The discourse surrounding the intersection of public transit investment and housing availability has become increasingly pertinent, particularly in regions like California. The 4 key points that warrant in-depth analysis and discussion include: 1. The necessity of aligning public investment with housing accessibility. The argument posits that significant financial commitments to public transit systems must be accompanied by proactive zoning reforms to enable affordable housing development near transit hubs. Public transit is meant to enhance accessibility and mobility, yet without adequate housing options nearby, the investments can become futile. This misalignment results in a scenario where public funds are used to enhance infrastructure that remains inaccessible to a substantial segment of the population due to high real estate prices. The analysis should explore how this disconnect affects ridership levels, urban sprawl, and overall community engagement with public transportation. 2. Impact of current zoning laws. Existing zoning regulations often impose restrictions that inhibit the construction of diverse housing types near transit stations, thereby reinforcing socioeconomic divides. This point underscores the limitations of zoning laws that favor single-family homes and exacerbate affordability crises in urban areas. A discussion on the specific aspects of zoning that create barriers, such as minimum lot sizes, restrictions on multifamily units, and other land use regulations, can illuminate the structural changes needed to facilitate housing growth. Moreover, examining case studies of cities that have successfully reformed their zoning laws could provide valuable insights into best practices and potential pitfalls. 3. Legislative advocacy for policy change. The call to action from advocates and lawmakers like Representatives Friedman and Scott Peters highlights the political dimension of this issue. Their push for legislative changes aims to dismantle the barriers that prevent affordable housing development near transit. Analyzing the political landscape, including the roles of various stakeholders, e.g., local governments, community organizations, and real estate developers, can reveal the complexities of enacting such reforms. Furthermore, discussion should include the potential resistance from affluent communities that may prioritize maintaining the status quo over inclusive housing policies. 4. Potential societal and environmental outcomes. Advocates argue that integrating housing development with transit infrastructure can lead to broader societal benefits such as increased transit ridership, reduced traffic congestion, and a more sustainable urban environment. A comprehensive analysis should delve into the potential positive externalities of this integration. For instance, increased access to public transit can improve economic opportunities for lower-income individuals, foster community development, and contribute to lower carbon emissions. Evaluating studies that correlate housing density near transit with these outcomes can strengthen the argument for zoning reform as a critical component of urban planning. In conclusion, the dialogue on public transit and housing availability is not merely about infrastructure investment, it is inherently tied to socioeconomic equity, legislative advocacy, and sustainable urban development. By addressing these 4 key points, stakeholders can engage in a more nuanced and productive conversation about how best to move forward in creating accessible, affordable, and transit-oriented communities. 1. The New York City subway and zoning reforms, in the early 20th century. The construction of the New York City subway system was a monumental public investment aimed at enhancing urban mobility. However, the zoning laws at the time limited the development of affordable housing near subway stations. This disconnect led to the phenomenon of transit deserts, where lower-income residents were unable to find affordable housing close to efficient transit options. In the 1960s and 1970s, advocacy groups began to push for reforms that would allow for mixed-use developments and higher-density housing near transit hubs, leading to significant changes in zoning policies in various neighborhoods. 2. San Francisco's housing crisis and transit-oriented development. In the 2000s, San Francisco faced a severe housing crisis exacerbated by rapid transit investments, particularly with the expansion of the Bay Area Rapid Transit BART system. Despite the substantial public investment in transit, strict zoning laws limited the construction of affordable housing near BART stations. Activists and city planners argued that the city needed to adopt transit-oriented development principles which would permit denser housing near transit lines. This conversation has led to various initiatives aimed at changing local zoning laws to promote affordable housing, although challenges remain in balancing development with community concerns. 3. Los Angeles Metro expansion and housing equity. The Los Angeles Metro system has undergone significant expansion since the early 2000s, with billions of public dollars allocated for new lines and upgrades. However, critics noted that existing zoning laws often favored single-family home developments which were not affordable for many residents. In response, community organizations and policymakers have pushed for changes to zoning regulations to allow for more diverse housing options near transit stations. This advocacy has resulted in ongoing discussions about equity and access, emphasizing the need for affordable housing to be integrated into transit planning to ensure that the benefits of public investment reach all demographics. The future outlook for the relationship between public transit investment and housing availability near transit stations in California and potentially other urban areas reveals several crucial trends and predictions. 1. Increased pressure for zoning reforms. As public investment in transit systems continues to grow, the pressure for zoning reforms will intensify. Advocates will increasingly argue that current zoning laws are outdated and restrictive, impeding the creation of affordable housing options near transit stations. This push for reform is expected to gain momentum as more stakeholders recognize the correlation between accessible housing and the effectiveness of transit systems. 2. Policy changes and legislative actions. Legislators influenced by constituents and advocacy groups are likely to introduce and support policies that promote higher density housing around transit hubs. Expect to see more initiatives that aim to legalize multifamily housing development, streamline the permitting process, and incentivize developers to build affordable units. This legislative shift may also include the establishment of incentives for municipalities that adopt more flexible zoning laws. 3. Integration of housing in transit planning. Urban planners will increasingly adopt an integrated approach that combines housing in transit planning. This holistic model will not only prioritize the construction of housing near transit but also consider the social, environmental, and economic impacts of such developments. Future urban designs will likely emphasize walkability, mixed-use developments, and community engagement to create vibrant neighborhoods that leverage transit access. 4. Technological advancements in urban development. The role of technology in urban planning will become more pronounced. With data analytics and smart city initiatives guiding development decisions, tools that analyze traffic patterns, demographic trends, and housing demand will inform zoning reforms and housing strategies. Additionally, technological innovations in construction and sustainable building practices will facilitate the development of affordable and environmentally friendly housing options. 5. Increased public awareness and engagement. As discussions around housing affordability and transit accessibility gain traction, public awareness will grow. Community engagement campaigns will educate residents about the importance of zoning reforms and their direct impact on quality of life. This heightened awareness will lead to greater public participation in local government decisions pushing for more equitable urban policies. 6. Potential for mixed-use developments. The future will likely see a rise in mixed-use developments that incorporate residential, commercial, and recreational spaces near transit stations. These developments will cater to diverse income levels and provide a range of amenities, fostering a sense of community. By creating neighborhoods where people can live, work, and play without relying heavily on cars, cities can reduce traffic congestion and environmental impacts. 7. Impact of remote work trends. The rise of remote work may lead to shifts in housing demand as more individuals prioritize living in affordable areas with good transit access rather than being tied to high-cost urban centers. This trend could encourage suburban regions to adopt more progressive zoning laws, creating new opportunities for housing development near transit options. 8. Focus on environmental sustainability. With increasing awareness of climate change, the integration of sustainability into housing and transit planning will become a priority. Future housing developments near transit hubs will likely emphasize eco-friendly designs, energy efficiency, and sustainable materials. This focus will not only contribute to environmental goals but also appeal to a growing demographic of environmentally conscious consumers. 9. Equity and social justice considerations. As the conversation around housing and transit evolves, equity will be a central theme. Policymakers will be challenged to ensure that zoning reforms do not inadvertently displace low-income communities. Future policies will need to include provisions for affordable housing and protections against gentrification, ensuring that all residents can benefit from improved transit access. 10. Economic implications of housing near transit. Economically, the benefits of increased housing supply near transit stations are expected to be substantial. More affordable housing options will lead to increased ridership on public transit, generating higher revenue for transit agencies. Additionally, greater accessibility can stimulate local economies as residents will likely spend more time and money in nearby businesses. Conclusion. In summary, as California and other urban areas grapple with housing shortages and the need for effective public transit systems, the future will be shaped by a concerted push for zoning reforms, integrated planning, and community engagement. The evolving landscape will prioritize affordable housing development near transit hubs, driven by a recognition of the interconnectedness of housing, transit, and overall urban sustainability. With the right policies and public support, cities can create thriving, equitable communities that maximize the benefits of public investment in transit.